A representational artist goes through a series of abstract phases before they get to that final representational form. Most of the time, I feel like I'm an abstract artist. A lot of the things that I do are reflections on mortality, the fascination of the inevitability of all things. They seem to be more interested in kind of like degrading the human body. They wanted to like tear it apart. They wanted to show the grotesque. They wanted to like celebrate the beauty in the grotesque. And I remember just like wanting to celebrate the beauty in the beauty and not being interested in the grotesque. When I was in art school, like in critique and everything, we used to call it the B word, like, because you weren't allowed to say like something was beautiful. I know a lot of artists who are really kind of nervous, genuinely nervous about AI because it has this potential to replace all of us. In the 1800s, when the camera was invented, they predicted at that time that painting was going to die. It did usher in the end of painting as it had been done before. And what it ushered in was Impressionism, which was a way of making that people before the camera couldn't have even conceptualized.
So after the invention of photography, there came Impressionism.
Yeah.
So after the invention of AI, what do you think is going to come after us?
Avoid having a style as long as you can. The path to having a style is make, make, make. Don't think about it, just make and make and make and make. And when you get to the end, turn around and look back. And if you've just been making in an honest way, the work will all look like something, and that will be your style. My name's Erik Durant. Welcome to Studio 303 at Hatch Street. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. What do you do?
What do? I am primarily a sculptor. I teach figure drawing and figure sculpture at the local community college. And then the rest of the time I just make my own sculpture. This is part of an unfinished series that I've been. Every time I get a commission, my own personal work goes to the back burner a little bit. And so I've been working on it for 3 or 4 years, and it's one of 4 figures, and it's probably 90% away from being ready to cast. And the other 2 are, and then there's a 4th figure that I still have yet to make. But they're all gonna be, they're bound. I have the binding for this someplace else, but they're all bound, and it's called the Bound Captive series. And it really, I'm known for doing all these figures that are kind of tied up in different ways, and there's some of those things are obviously what they are, but for me, the notion of being bound in that way is really about political. It's political, so it's about being held back and held down and told what you can't be. So the Bound Captives are really kind of about that, and they're very expressive, and people like them, and I just need to finish them.
How do you view women?
Huh?
How do you view women?
How do I view women? As human beings.
As art form.
Huh?
As art form.
It's interesting. As a figurative artist, I am interested in expressing things. Usually the things that I'm working on are expressions about triumph over adversity in things in my own life and my own experiences. I always find that I sculpt males and females. A lot of times I'm sculpting things based on models that I have access to. So I work with models, both male and female, almost every day at the college that I teach at, because I teach figure drawing and figure sculpting. So frequently I'm working with more females because just in general there are more female models than male models. But I would say that as an artist, I prefer to work with male models, and that's because not because of any type of like visual interest that I have. It's because I am male, and so I can express my thoughts and ideas as an artist better through the male form because that's my experience. But I think I could do it, almost as well through the female form. Some of these things were done from these were actually done from life. So, this is a pose that a model that I worked with for a very long time actually held. And so that sort of, that came up with that idea. This sculpture is called Little Birds, plural, even though it's only one figure and one bird. So Little Birds, plural. A lot of the things that I do are reflections on mortality and that component of the human experience. And not from a sense of like, I'm getting older and I'm worried about it, more from the fascination of the inevitability of all things. They're talking about the inevitability of extinction events or the inevitability of our own lives. So this sort of is about this kind of like reflection about the inevitability and the fascination with what happens kind of afterwards. And so she kind of, sort of lovingly kind of explores sort of the little bird that's sort of, dead at her feet. But the other kind of component of it is that from a technical point of view, it's technically a very challenging sculpt. So a lot of figures, if a figure is just kind of standing in frontal and looks something like this, they're rather easy to cast. But this one was very challenging because of the way the figure is all compressed, and not compressed into like a single boulder, but there's spacing in between her arm underneath, and the way that the legs and the feet are connected. So I think that there was also a kind of a technical challenge for me. Because as I mentioned at another point, I'm very much just interested in making things. Outside of wanting to express myself and being an artist, there is just a component of it that is really just I want to make stuff, and I want to challenge myself, and I want to do things that are new and kind of interesting to me. This is my version of Theseus and the Minotaur. I think that sometimes when people think about Greek mythology or mythologies from the past, I think that sometimes people think that the Greeks thought that there were half man, half horse people running around in the woods, and they don't really realize that those things are just a metaphor. So a centaur, in my mind, is a metaphor for somebody who drinks too much and becomes an animal from the waist down. Right? That's pretty kind of literal, not an actual thing. The Minotaur, which sat at the center of the labyrinth and was a devourer of children, is in my mind, the labyrinth is a metaphor for the human mind. And the Minotaur is the deepest, darkest thing that sits at the center of the human mind. And so Theseus goes in, tethered with a string, into this maze in order to do battle with this deepest, darkest thing. So I've always sort of seen it as a metaphor for doing battle with your own demons internally. And that's just my take on it. So of course, if I was going into do battle, I wouldn't go in with a bronze sword. So he has a little tiny handgun that it looks like it's like a rusty old .38 that you found in a desk drawer somewhere. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And when he confronts the Minotaur, rather than this kind of big epic Hollywood battle or something, the Minotaur is just like yeah, like here I am. And he's just sort of like this kind of like. This kind of other version of him inside his own mind. So you can see this is the small maquette that was done for this, and then we used this to blow this up into this sort of scale up here. So, so a lot of scaling. That's that helps you to get things where you want. If you jump, I feel that if you jump right into life size, which some people do, and you can. there's a tendency as you go up in scale for the gesture to get stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. So one of the ways that you can kind of control that is if you do smaller gesture studies. The gestures are going to be, the smaller ones are going to be much more expressive. And then you try to use that to kind of pull that up, but they naturally get stiffer as they get bigger. And so it's a constant kind of battle. So this is not really actually a thing. It is a collection of things. So when you make monuments and things that go outside, the clay often stays with the artist. So these are actually different figures that have already been cast in bronze and are on location. So there's two different things here. This is Elizabeth Tabor, who's in Marion, Massachusetts. People sometimes come in and be like, wow, it's so interesting that their arms are removed. Their arms are removed because of the mold making process. So in order to make the mold for this, I had to take this section off, and actually this piece actually comes off. So this was mold, and then this is reattached in the, and there's another piece. But I reuse the clay, so some of the stuff has been broken down already, but I just like having them hang out here. So this was one, and this statue is the Mahoney's. They are sit outside of a library in New Hampshire.
For the giraffe, so
Yeah.
how do you find like a reference for something like that? Do you just make it out of image?
So this is actually the project I'm working on. I haven't posted any of it online yet, so I'm just kind of waiting. It's something I'm kind of doing on my own. I'm in between commissions right now, and so that gives me an opportunity to work on something large of my own. So this initial draft here, the little tiny one, this was sculpted from life at the Roger Williams Zoo. So I went to the zoo. I take my students to the zoo usually once a year, and we either draw or sculpt from life. I always sculpt, but so I sculpted this from life just from looking at the giraffe, and it's just a small gesture sketch. I was mostly doing it as a demo, and I came home that night, and I was just doodling in my journal, and I decided that it needed to be taking a walk with this little spaceman kind of guy here. So, but it's kind of evolved into something else, like what it kind of just sort of like as the creative process kind of goes along. It starts out with the sculpture from life, and then this added component, but the two characters, this character is going to be wearing like a gas mask, and it's sharing an oxygen source with the guy on the ground, and it's called the Last Giraffe, and it's my thoughts and feelings about the inevitability of conservation efforts. So what's it like to be like the last person tending for the last of a species as it's about to kind of move on. So I'm making it at a larger scale, and so I'm in the process of using this small gesture sketch to blow it up to a larger scale and kind of work out some other components of it. So here's the giraffe here. I have a cable over there. They're separated right now, so I can work on them separately, but this is going to come down. And this figure actually sits out a little bit further, but my table's too small. And so this is the initial sketch, which I did a little bit from life for the spaceman over here, and he'll get the tank and everything. But I adjusted the pose to be based on Masaccio's Expulsion from Eden, which is a very important sort of painting in art history. So I give a little bit of an art historical nod there to, and the Expulsion of Eden is obviously the sort of there's all kinds of things that are associated there. So that's what I'm working on.
Does the anatomy matters much when it comes to animals?
Absolutely, yeah. When it comes to anatomy, I always say, and different people might think different things, but I think that the path to understanding animal anatomy is through the human experience. So nobody, when they go to the butcher shop, wants to know this, but animals actually have all the same bones and muscles that we do, with the same exact names. We name them different things when we consume them, but they have all the same muscles. And so it's constructing a figure and going through the anatomy of the figure. A human figure is the same as a figure for an animal. So with these, I have a whole bunch of anatomy charts for different animals. It's pretty hard to find anatomy charts for giraffes, but there's a lot of similarities between horse anatomy, and so there's a lot of information out there on horse anatomy. So I'm kind of like pulling that together. But I also have taken several trips back to the zoo. They have the zoo that's close to me has 3 giraffes. But it's very specifically one that I'm like kind of following, and I go and I've visited her several times. But the goal is, since we're talking about this, the goal is to take this scale. So this is the gesture sketch. This is a quarter scale model. So this is a 1/4 scale, and the goal is to take this and scan it and use that to create a digital enlargement, which I'll reskim coat and clay.
Wow.
And the distance from here to here. In this studio, so this is going to be about 13 feet high, and so the ceiling right up there is going to be right about there. So I actually have a mechanism built in here that this whole top section can come off and come down to the ground, so I'll be able to take the top off.
When I make sculptures, I paint them. Why
Yep.
don't artists, like when you do a large scale, why don't you guys paint them?
Yeah, it's funny. You look at like classical Greek and Greek bronzes, and those were all like painted.
Yeah.
They painted them. We have a relationship with bronze, and I patina things in a way to give sort of color variation. So even though I tend to use a lot of French brown, which is a very traditional patina, there's a lot of variation in there, and I just like the way it looks. In terms of that. Plus, if you have bronzes that are meant to be outside, paint wears away. And so if you get a good natural good patina on there with a good sealant over it, you don't have to kind of treat it all the time.
Is there certain expressions we're trying to convey?
Well, when people see my work, I'm primarily a figure sculptor. So, there's always that kind of question, like, why are you figurative? That's just... It's kind of just what I do. I make people, I study people. A funny sort of aside, I always say, like, you never ask a baseball player why they play baseball. Like at a certain point, it's just like, that's just what I do. You ask them how they play baseball or why they play baseball the way they do. But just being a figure sculptor just comes naturally to me. So I've always kind of gravitated to that. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But my primary interest is in telling stories. Narrative, and I try to do that mostly through gesture, trying to get the figures to tell the stories, not get the stuff, the accoutrements to tell the stories.
Yeah, so I would like to know why you do your art the way you do. Like in this modern era where so many things are more abstract, and you still kept the traditional like focus on form and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I teach, I talk a lot about the word abstract because I personally feel that that abstraction is one of the most misused words in the art world. My definition of abstraction is that an abstraction is a simplification of a known thing. So, for example, if you are writing a journal article or reading a journal article and you have to do the abstract of it, you don't skim the journal article and then write the abstract. You have to read the journal article 3, 5, 7 times, and you have to know it backwards and forwards. Then you're able to simplify it down to its core points. I think that a lot of times when we hear people saying that they're looking for something or they're trying to find something and their work is abstract, I think that's actually experimental art. And experimental art and abstract art sometimes might look the same, but they're not the same. I think that a representational artist goes through a series of abstract phases before they get to that final representational form. And so I think that being able to, really knowing a form allows you to then abstract it, which is part of the reverse process of being able to build it back again. And to that point where I'm trying to get to is that for myself, whereas my work might look representational and non-abstract on the surface, it spends 98% of its life in an abstract phase when I'm working with it. It's only at the end that it becomes sort of that other thing. So most of the time I feel like I'm an abstract artist when I'm working. When I'm presenting my work, it looks like something else. So it's just sort of my relationship with abstraction. I personally feel that a lot of the great abstract work that is out there is a product of an artist sort of moving through it, like really knowing something, knowing what it is that they're looking for, knowing what they're going for, and then deciding that at some point in the process that that is enough to express what they want to express. And so it's like, deciding like, this is my stop, I'm going to get off here, and I'm going to let it continue to exist on its own. So I think that all artists work with abstraction and are really abstract artists. It's just, how the rest of the world sees you is maybe something different.
After Duchamp, there are so many more like abstract stuff. And do you think like people today still do abstract because they actually see abstract, or they are trying to just copy the past?
Well, that's why I think that a lot of it, I often try to differentiate, and these are just my opinions, but I think that there's a big difference between, like I said before, experimental, like when you're trying to find, and we're all doing that at certain points in time, when great explorers of the past went out into the wilderness, they didn't know what they were going to find. They had a hypothesis, just like a scientist. When a scientist does an experiment, in order to formulate a hypothesis, you have to have a general sense of what you're going to get. I think that sometimes in and maybe in fiction, there's this idea that there's a mad scientist and they take this chemical A and this chemical B and they just mix it together and an explosion happens and it's like, wow, I discovered something. But I think real science looks like, well, we know that this is going to do this and this, and then they're trying to make that thing happen. I think that when people go off into the wilderness and they're exploring unknown things, they have a little bit of a general sense of what it is, where they're going, and what it is that they're looking for, with the hope of possibly finding something new. And that's all in that phase of experimentation. Whereas I think that true abstraction really is sort of knowing something at a higher level than, and then I don't mean to be like hierarchical, but like knowing something at a level that's beyond like the normal level of knowing something, and then being able to present it in reverse in different ways so that other viewers can experience those different ways that you might understand something. So that's why I was saying, like, as a figurative artist, when I begin with what I call, and what many other figurative sculptors call, like the figurative abstraction. It's a set of guidelines that people use for being able to construct figures and keep them symmetrical. And you see it in all kinds of different places. You see it in everything from the way we dress, the way superheroes are designed. Classic superhero costumes all reflect the figurative abstraction that we have coming to us through Loomis and other folks that goes all the way back to the Renaissance. So you could see similarities between contemporary figurative art, superhero costume design, and the Renaissance drawings of somebody like Raphael. It's kind of that same kind of vein, because those abstractions are coming from like true observations. So
again, moving into modern art. Of course, we know like the position of how like realism stuff has changed. It changed a lot. So I just want to know like your opinion on how it changed and how do you think it will change on the future?
So I'm part of a generation, I would say, somebody who went to art school in the 1990s, and in the 1990s, when I was going to art school, I remember sitting around with my friends looking at all these art magazines, and you're 20-something years old, and you're like, oh, this is all a bunch of garbage, and like, what is this stuff? And and people talking about like, the art, the New York art world and what it was all about, and some of all this kind of stuff, and but basically just being like a young person looking at magazines, because that's what we used to do before, like, social media, and just not understanding it, and wanting something more, and at the same time taking art history classes, and looking at people like Bernini, and some of the people that I've been chasing my whole life, and thinking, like, I know it could be better, and I know it could be kind of more, and so there's something else out there. And fast forward as you kind of move from being, an art student to a young emerging artist, to you get to sort of make the work that you want to make. And I know a number of different figurative artists who are similar to me, who have the same story of, like, wanting to be doing something different than what was going on when we were in school, and probably generations back, you kind of do these things, and I think that somewhere around the 2000s there was a new figurative renaissance that began, that is a product of the group of Gen X people like myself, who like grew up playing with action figures and reading comic books, going to art school and wanting things to be figurative, representational, narrative, storytelling, things of that nature. And then I think if you combine it with the democratizing effects of social media as they emerged, where people got to vote with their fingertips, I think that there's just a kind of a resurgence of people who are interested in not traditional for the sake of being traditional, but older ways of making things that seem more tried and true. It's very different from just wanting to be traditional for the sake of being traditional. And wanting things that told stories, and wanting things, wanting people that look like people. When I was young, when I was a young artist, all of the figurative artists that were successful at that time, they were it just seemed to be, again, my opinion, but they seemed to be more interested in kind of like degrading the human body. They wanted to like tear it apart. They wanted to show the grotesque. They wanted to like celebrate the beauty in the grotesque. And I remember just like wanting to celebrate the beauty in the beauty, and not being interested in the grotesque. And I understand it. So I can understand it intellectually, and I can see why it was an important thing. But I think it also produced the next generation of artists who were like, how about we just make it just beautiful? Yeah. In fact, it's funny you reacted that way. When I was in art school, like in critique and everything, we used to call it the B word, like, because you weren't allowed to say like something was beautiful, And in my classes, I love to use the word beautiful now, because I'm reactionary. But we also use words like cool. There's nothing wrong with something being cool and just wanting something to look cool. I think that if you grow up reading things like comic books, like I said, cool is a real thing. It impacts us, but it's part of a sort of more contemporary set of aesthetic terms that relate to a particular generation. So I like things that are beautiful, cool, visually interesting, stuff like that.
Do you think there is a standard for a good piece of art?
I think there are probably a few different ways I could answer that. I think I see kind of where you're going. I think that deep down, my understanding of art and my love of art in general, I believe that the art world is a big, beautiful place with room for all kinds of different people. And knowing and appreciating and understanding different types of works are different from what you personally like. And there's nothing wrong with just liking what you like. You like the bands you like the, you could recognize that all different forms of music have significance, but just say like, I just don't like, that's not what I'm interested in spending my time with, especially in a world where we're so inundated with just so many things. So I don't necessarily think that there is a specific standard, but I do think that there are certain standards as they relate to like quality. So a great work of art has great quality, whether it's an abstract ceramic form, or it's a welded steel form, or it's a bronze figurative sculpture. There's like standards within those different areas for how to properly craft something. So I think that craftsmanship is part of a standard. I think that depending on what you're doing there might be different types of standards. So like in the work that I make, I think that proportions are important because I make people that look like people. So it's important that their proportions are correct. But that being said, proportions don't always have to be, human standards of proportions. Look at Mr. Incredible from The Incredibles, right? He has short, tiny legs and a big, giant torso. He's proportionally inaccurate, but he's proportionally right for what it is that thing is. But I wouldn't make my figures that way. So I think that maybe the standards are, somewhat self-imposed. I apply my own standards based on what I think that a work of art should be for me. Maybe that actually is the answer to that. Each individual artist should come with their own, but they should make sure that their standards are well vetted. So, by themselves.
Do you think the standard changes?
Yeah, I do. I think that, and that's probably why we see different art forms, as they evolve over time. And having been in the art world long enough at this point in time, I've watched the art world change. And so what was important, 20 years ago, 25, almost 30 years ago, I was in art school. 20 years ago, I started teaching at the college level. And I've watched what has been significant for us to like present and try to get out of students just change over time. And so I would say that it's probably that the standards, I think they change kind of place to place a little bit, but I think they change generationally. What we need to be as artists in 2026 is probably different than what we needed to be in artists, as artists, in 20 years ago. Especially, let's be real. The in 2001, the world changed. It changed significantly, and there's kind of the world that was before all of that stuff happened, and just the global situation was different. And I think that was a moment when art needed to be something else. But before that, you can see a very distinct difference in work that was done before that. And I think that looking at those kind of significant events of the early 2000s, if you look at what's going on right now with AI and the potential of AI, both positive and negative, however people sort of sit on that fence, art is going to be different in a world where a computer can render something better than a human being can. That's just the reality. The camera changed. I know. Let's talk about our AI for a quick second.
Sure.
Because I know a lot of artists who are really kind of nervous, genuinely nervous about AI because it has this potential to replace all of us. And the best example that I can think of is, looking back at this kind of technological change in, the 1800s when the camera was invented. They predicted at that time that painting was going to die, and that because you have a machine that can render an image because they saw painting at that point in time as the creation of an image. Right? They saw painting as many. I'm sort of generalizing a little bit, but the primary importance of a reason for painting at that time was to create an image. And when you have a machine that can do that better than you can, it actually, although they predicted the end of painting, it did usher in the end of painting as it had been done before. And what it ushered in was Impressionism. Which was a way of making that people before the camera couldn't have even conceptualized. So I think that we're sitting at that moment in time. And personally, some of my favorite artists are those transitional artists, the ones who were trained in the traditional French Academy before Impressionism, and then as a result of changing technologies, made the jump and became that first generation of Impressionists, because they still all had that French Academy training. And so, for me, I think that there's something that's just very exciting about being at a time that's so analogous that we're looking at, arguably a computer. You could tell your computer, like I got to be careful not to say things to mine because it like does everything I say. But if you could tell a computer to make a 3D image or a 3D model of like a sculpture, and it could probably make one better than I could, and then you could just 3D print it, and boom, there it is, and you can make it into a statue, scale it to any size, have it fabricated, etc. What that does is, I think that it causes us to look at the difference between what say sculpture is. Is sculpture the end product? Just like, is painting just the creation of an image, or is painting the act of painting? Is sculpture a verb, or is it a noun? Right? If sculpture is a noun, then it's just a sculpture is the object. It's the remnant of the sculptor's process. But if sculpture is a verb, then it's the act of doing the thing. And the real value is not in the final object, it's in the creation of the object. And if that is the case, that's something that a computer can't do. And it's going to cause a new generation of people that are going to be focused on the value of the hand above all else. So,
if it achieves the same outcome, do you think, like, in the buyer's perspective, they would care about, like, whether you have the process or not?
I think, it's a great question, because when it comes down to it, maybe 90% of people won't care, but in a world of billions of people, what are we up to, like 7 billion people now? In a world of 7 billion people, if only 10% of people care about the handmade art object, that's probably enough. So if 90% of people don't care, the vast majority of people don't care that much about art anyways. You're seeing, like, in terms of like AI, sometimes in comic books, you're already seeing like labels being put on things like no AI. You have certain big animation studios that are clearly using tons of AI, but then there's a sort of side movement, a more punk rock movement of like smaller animation houses that are kind of digging in their heels on that other thing, and that's getting a premium. So maybe the vast majority of sculpture and maybe kind of monuments are just going to be kind of just printed out in the future, and maybe that's going to be fine. But I think that there's going to be plenty of room for people who want to do it by hand. And maybe there'll be a premium for that. At least I hope there will be. So, and I think that probably, people who would, be listening to this interview or watching this interview and interested in what I'm doing, those would be those people that would be concerned about that. So a little bit of hope, that's all.
As you mentioned earlier, so after the invention of photography, there came Impressionism.
Yep.
So after the invention of AI, what do you think is going to come after us?
Well, that's why I bring up that story in that way, because if you had asked someone at that moment when, like, and there are other influences on Impressionism. Photography is just one of the things that kind of like, changes how people viewed the image. If you had asked those people, like right at that moment as it was about to happen, when they were scared about what it was going to be, they couldn't have told you. And even if they could, it would have just been speculation. So anything that we would do right now would only be speculation. Like, who knows? If there's probably an alternative history you could go back, and the early Impressionists who were experimenting with what painting could have been, they could have been all just poo-pooed, and Impressionism would have just died at that moment, and it never would have become. So I don't know. I think that there is this opportunity for it to be possibly something more. I do very much think it's going to focus on the action. I think that there might be some possibility to maybe go back into, some of the, I always look at the the 20th century in particular as the kind of textbook of possibilities. Like when you're reading a textbook, like a college textbook on art history, you read through the decades and the various movements of the 20th century, and they just feel like an art 101 design book of like there's this and there's this and all these different things. I think that in many ways the 20th century, like wrote that textbook of possibilities. I think that the future might be going back and pulling from various elements, and that more of the kind of the juxtaposition of different things. When you have the full kind of set of possibilities, the complete spectrum of what can be. The next thing could be kind of combinations of those things maybe. But I do think it's very much connected to like the action. I think that people might go back and, for example, take a second look at someone like Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock, he's seen in art museums showing the remnant of the action of painting. And most people walk in and look at those paintings and they say silly things like, like a kid could do that. But a kid couldn't have done that in 1950, like at that moment in time, because, Jackson Pollock, and other people like them and, the people he was working with, they were trying something that was new and different that was about that action. And I think that, art right now, look, I'll use my my Instagram following, for example. I don't post a lot on Instagram these days. I'm a little angry at it, so I've been avoiding it. But probably shooting myself in the foot on that one. But that being said, I find that when I post pictures of my finished work, people are interested in it, and you get set number of views or likes or whatever. But when I show pictures or videos of my process of me doing it, I find that people are more interested in watching the process of doing it. So that's what's got me thinking about the thought that it might be more of to be Jackson Pollock, it might be the action of the thing rather than the thing itself. So that might be something looking forward. But I don't have a crystal ball. So, yeah.
Do you think you will change to adjust to this AI era?
I've always been changing as an artist. Like it's interesting because I'm interested in technology. I'm interested in making stuff. I have a lifelong love of making stuff. And so, when new tools come out, I'm the first person that wants to go out and buy tools. I love tools of all kinds. I do a little bit of 3D modeling on the computer. I make some of the parts for some of my things, and a little bit of 3D printing because I like to do it. I'm not the best at it, but it's a new technology and I'm interested. And there were lots of, to continue on that sort of discussion about, Impressionism, there were lots of painters who were early adopters of photography because they were interested in new things, because it's exciting. If you're a lover of film, you don't just spend your whole life watching films from one era. You watch new films as they come out, and you get excited about that, and you want to evolve and change. So, as an artist, when I got started, I was really interested in mold making and resin casting and some of those things, which were very new technology, not new technologies, they've been around for a while, but like artists doing things with resins was really kind of popular when I was in grad school in around 2000. And I was very interested in doing that. And then bringing that into the process of what it is that I wanted to do. So as things change, I was very interested in digital and 3D modeling. The place where I don't like AI is that there's a part of the making that has moved away from like making something in a different way, and it just moved towards talking about it. The idea of like the prompt, if there was more involved in like the prompt, if you had to like make something by clay and then say like, how would you do something, like that might be more engaging to me, but it's become sort of in certain ways, I think, less engaging, and we see that in our culture as we just, I hate to sound nostalgic, but it used to be kind of interesting to look something up. You know, you'd look something up in like an encyclopedia, and you might run across another article accidentally as you were flipping pages going to something that would catch your eye. And you'd still do, like, you know, surfing the internet, you accidentally see things, and that's kind of, you know, great. But with a lot of AI, you ask it for a thing, and then it just gives you the thing. And so you don't get to flip a few pages and see other iterations, at least in, you know, sort of the way, you know, my understanding of it. You know, so I think that that's a loss as it's becoming too simple. And maybe people will seek for things to become more difficult. You know, because, you know, we like things when they're difficult. You know, it's, you know, nobody's impressed if you walk around the block. I mean, maybe I don't want to, you know, disparage some people. Some people it is actually an awesome thing to walk around the block. But if I came home and said, hey, I took my dog around the block, you know, nobody would think that that was some great achievement. But if if my dog and I like climbed a mountain, like people will be like, oh, that's cool. And if you climbed a mountain that they know, or you climbed like a highest, like that's the kind of stuff that people are kind of interested in. You know, and I think that a lot of the stuff that's out there is just like, yeah.
Being a artist, like a figurative artist, have you ever thought of the fear of like not having like a very distinct style compared to like abstract artists?
I'm not afraid of that at all. I think my work always stands out. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, I don't think it's better than other figurative artists' work. But I think that what I do definitely looks a little bit different than other figurative artists. You know, so I combine certain things. I make figures a particular way. I'm actually it's kind of odd to me. Like sometimes here in my studio, and we have open studio events here a couple times a year, and people will come into the studio and they'll look around and they'll see all the stuff, and they'll say something like, wow, is all of this your work, or are there other people in here? And I look around and be like, how could you possibly think that like anybody, like this all looks to me like the same person made this? You know, so
It does, yeah.
it's funny you bring up style. As somebody who's been teaching college for a long time, and when I was in college, there was always this pressure to show your style, to have your style, to do this thing, and I push back on that all the time. And I tell my students, because they usually transfer on to other institutions, I always tell them, avoid having a style as long as you can. You know, don't worry about a style. And, you know, other art teachers, you know, they're going to probably not like what I'm about to say. The path to having a style is make. Don't think about it. Just make and make and make and make. And when you get to the end, whether that's the end of a semester or the end of your a college degree, or you know finishing graduate school or whatever it is, when you get to a certain point, turn around and look back. And if you've just been making you've been making in an honest way, the work will all look like something, and that will be your style, and it'll be right there, and it'll be natural, it'll be organic, and people will relate to it. The more that people try to have a style, I think that just leads to work that seems. I don't want to be disparaging again. It seems like it seems overworked. You know, I think that the artists who just kind of come at it from a kind of natural, and that's whether it's being an abstract artist of some type. If you want to be an abstract artist, if that's what you like, know what it is that you're abstracting. Study it like over and over and over again, and just make, and your body will just naturally kind of make a thing. You know, if you look at like my drawings, or you flip through my journals, my drawings all look the same. You know, and I think they're wildly different. Like sometimes I'll come home like. And I'll talk to my wife and I'll say like, oh, I had this like major breakthrough. I'm going to do this new thing. It's like going to be all this like, and she'll come in and be like, yeah, it looks exactly the same. I'm like, yeah, but it is like 0.01% different than these other things. So no, that's, yeah. So as far as, having a style, like, just make and do what you love, and it'll come about organically. That's what I think.